She was 8 years old, with a name that sounded like something out of a fairy tale, Cherish Lily Periwinkle. Born on Christmas Eve in Orlando, she was the light of her mother Rain's life, a gift wrapped in innocence. Cherish was full of wonder, laughter, and love. She liked to play teacher with her little sisters, ride her new bike through the sun-drenched sidewalks, and draw pictures of animals. Her father Billy, who lived in California, said she was the very definition of pure love. But love, even the purest kind, doesn't always keep the monsters away. On the humid evening of June 21, 2013, Rain was stressed. She was at a Dollar General store in Jacksonville, Florida, with Cherish and her 2 younger daughters, Destiny and Nevia. The girls needed clothes, and Rain had no money. She vented her worries to an employee, unaware that a man had been watching her every move. Donald James Smith was a 56-year-old registered sex offender who had been released from prison just weeks earlier. He approached Rain in the parking lot, offering help. He said his wife had a $150 Walmart gift card and they'd be happy to buy the girls some clothes. Rain hesitated, but he looked into her eyes and told her she was safe. He said he understood how hard it was to raise kids. He seemed kind, harmless, familiar. Rain made a choice that would haunt her forever. They all got into his van. At Walmart, they browsed for over an hour. The girls picked out dresses. Rain tried to stay near them. Donald put only one item in his cart, a length of rope. Rain noticed it but said nothing. She didn't want to appear paranoid. It was getting late, and the kids were tired and hungry. Rain was ready to leave, but Donald said he'd buy McDonald's for everyone. He mouthed to Rain, "I'm going to McDonald's, what do you want?" Cherish begged to go with him. Rain let her. That was the last time she saw her daughter alive. Rain wandered the aisles for a bit, waiting, but then the store announcement came. Walmart was closing. She looked for Cherish, for Donald. They were gone. Her phone wasn't working. She screamed for help. No one listened. Finally, someone handed her a phone. She called 911. "I think my daughter's been taken," she told the dispatcher. Her voice shook. She tried to explain. A man she had just met. A promise of kindness. A van. A McDonald's that had been closed for hours. Police arrived within minutes but treated it like a routine missing child case. It would be hours before an Amber Alert was issued. Hours too late. Walmart surveillance showed Donald and Cherish leaving the store and getting into his van. It was 10:30 p.m. The police released a bolo for a 1998 white Dodge van with curtains over the windows. An air unit was dispatched. They searched sex offender addresses. Then, at 9 a.m., a tip came in. A suspicious white van had been parked behind a church. Officers found it. Donald was inside, soaking wet, surrounded by Walmart bags. One officer took one look and said, "She's in the water." They found her 20 minutes later, in a shallow creek behind the church. Her small body bruised, strangled, discarded like trash. Her dress was nearby. Her hair floated on the surface. Donald Smith was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual battery. In custody, he showed no remorse. He denied everything, then contradicted himself, then blamed the little girl. His voice on a jailhouse recording was chilling. "She had to go," he said. "I don't care how. She had to go." Cherish Lily Periwinkle would never ride her bike again, never grow up, never fly to see her dad in California. And a mother's decision, born out of desperation and trust, became the thread that unraveled a tragedy the whole nation would grieve. News of the abduction and murder hit Jacksonville like a thunderclap. Morning headlines screamed of a missing girl. By noon, the word "missing" had turned into "dead." The police press conference was somber, restrained, but underneath the official statements, everyone knew the truth. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a failure. Within hours of Donald Smith's arrest, his past exploded across media outlets. He wasn't just a registered sex offender. He was a predator with a rap sheet spanning decades. Crimes against children, repeated arrests, prison terms. And yet, just 3 weeks before Cherish was killed, the state had let him walk free. Not only that, but he had met with police to verify his address, complying with sex offender registration requirements. Everything had looked normal. Paperwork was in order, but no one had warned the public. No one had raised the alarm. That failure sparked outrage. Parents demanded to know why a man like that could roam free, unsupervised, blending into society. Talk shows exploded. Online forums fumed. Protesters held signs outside courthouses with Cherish's picture and the words, "Never again." Rain, meanwhile, was silent. For days she didn't speak publicly. She stayed inside, grieving, barely able to eat, unable to sleep. When reporters camped outside her door, she turned them away. The guilt crushed her. She had trusted a stranger. She had let her daughter walk away with a man she had just met. And Cherish had died for it. But eventually, Rain spoke, standing in front of microphones, surrounded by flashing cameras. She said, "I thought he was helping us. I thought he was a good man. He said he had kids. He told me I was safe." She broke down in tears. "I should have said no. I should have held her hand. I should have never let her out of my sight." Behind her stood a photograph of Cherish, smiling in her flowered dress, the one she had worn the night she was killed. The community responded with an outpouring of support. Vigils were held. Flowers piled up at the Walmart entrance. A mural was painted on a school wall. Strangers sent money, cards, teddy bears. Her father Billy flew in from California and held a separate press conference, his voice trembling as he said, "My daughter was light, she was love, and now she's gone." The wheels of justice were turning fast. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. Donald Smith was moved to a secure facility. Interviews with jail staff revealed he showed no emotion, no sadness, no fear, just silence. But behind the scenes, the investigation dug deeper. What else had he done? Who had looked away before? And could this all have been prevented? Inside the cold gray walls of the Duval County Jail, Donald James Smith sat alone in a holding cell. Surveillance footage captured him pacing, mumbling to himself, sometimes even laughing under his breath. He showed no signs of remorse, no fear, no grief, just detachment, as if this were all routine. Meanwhile, investigators were combing through every minute of his life in the weeks before Cherish's murder. His phone records showed multiple disturbing calls, some to hotlines, others to random numbers, many of them unreturned. A deep dive into his internet activity painted a darker picture. Search histories filled with horrifying phrases, messages on forums that raised red flags, deleted files now recovered. It was like opening a door to a room no one ever wanted to see. At the state attorney's office, Assistant State Attorney Mark Khalil stared at Donald's criminal history. It was 19 pages long. 19. Prior charges included lewd conduct, attempted kidnapping, impersonating a state worker. He had impersonated a social worker to gain access to a child in 2009. He had served time. He had been evaluated. One psychologist warned he was a danger to society. Still, he got out. The system, the very mechanism meant to protect children, had failed again. Public outrage grew by the hour. Talk radio callers screamed for accountability. "How many chances do you give a monster before he takes a life?" one man yelled. On social media, a new hashtag started trending. #Justice for Cherish. Inside the courthouse, preparations for trial began. The prosecution team had one goal: death penalty. There would be no plea deal, no reduced charge. The state wanted to make an example of Donald Smith, not just for what he did to Cherish, but for every failure that allowed it. But it wasn't that simple. Smith's defense attorneys filed motions to suppress evidence. They argued he had mental health issues, that his rights had been violated during questioning, that his jailhouse conversations shouldn't be admissible. One motion even requested a change of venue, citing media coverage had already tainted the jury pool. Judge Mallory Cooper presided over the hearings, stern, meticulous, and unimpressed by delay tactics. She ruled most of the state's evidence admissible. She denied the change of venue. Cherish's family attended every hearing. Rain sat in the front row, her face gaunt, hands clutched tight. Billy sat a few rows behind, stone-faced, fists clenched. The two rarely spoke, divided by grief, by blame, by pain no words could patch. One afternoon, as the judge recessed the court, Rain whispered, "I hope he burns." Her voice didn't crack, it didn't tremble, it was steel. And outside, the crowd waited, dozens of supporters, signs, T-shirts, Buttons with Cherish's face. The city of Jacksonville had made her their child. Inside the jail, Donald sat in silence, waiting for a trial that could end his life. He wasn't worried. He was planning. The trial began under tight security. Swarms of media crews gathered outside the Duval County Courthouse. Helicopters circled above. Protesters lined the sidewalks holding signs that read, "Justice for Cherish," and "Never Forget." Every major news outlet was there. And inside the courtroom, there wasn't a single empty seat. The atmosphere was electric, yet cold. Donald Smith entered in a standard-issue jumpsuit. Flanked by deputies, he looked around briefly, locking eyes with no one. His expression was blank, unreadable. Prosecutor Mark Khalil stepped forward to deliver opening statements. Calm, collected, and deadly precise, he laid out the horror for the jury, the manipulation, the kidnapping, the rape, the murder. He paused as the photo of Cherish was displayed, a school portrait. Smiling, vibrant, forever frozen in time. One juror looked away, another wiped a tear. The defense, in contrast, stumbled through their opening. They didn't deny Cherish was dead. They didn't deny that Donald had been with her. But they suggested he was mentally ill, that he didn't understand his actions, that this was not premeditated murder but the act of a disturbed man. The courtroom remained unmoved. The first witness was Rain. She walked slowly to the stand, eyes down, gripping the rail for support. Her voice was soft, shaking. She described how she met Donald, how he offered help, how she watched Cherish walk away and never come back. The courtroom was silent except for the soft clicks of reporters' keyboards. Then came the surveillance footage. Jurors watched as Donald and Cherish walked out of Walmart. He held her hand. She looked tired, trusting. That image hit harder than any argument ever could. Medical examiners described Cherish's injuries in clinical but devastating detail. Over 20 bruises, signs of strangulation, sexual assault. Her body had been washed, her clothes discarded. The coroner paused several times. Unable to continue, Donald showed no reaction. More evidence poured in, his internet history, the rope found in the cart, DNA from the van. The prosecution painted a timeline so precise, so damning, there was almost no room for doubt. Every second was accounted for. Every piece of evidence tied to Donald. The defense tried to push back, bringing in a psychologist who testified that Donald suffered from impulse control disorder, among other diagnoses. But under cross-examination, the expert admitted Donald knew right from wrong. Rain was in the front row every day, sometimes crying, sometimes stone still. Billy flew in for closing arguments, sitting next to her for the first time since the funeral. They didn't speak, but they sat together. For Cherish, after closing statements, the jury deliberated. The room held its breath. Less than 3 hours later, they returned, guilty, on all counts. Rain wept. Billy closed his eyes. Donald Smith sat expressionless. But there was still more to come. Sentencing, and the possibility of death. The sentencing phase began under an even more intense spotlight. The guilt verdict had confirmed what most had already believed. But the next decision, whether Donald Smith would die for what he did, carried enormous weight. Cameras weren't allowed in the courtroom during this stage, but the tension inside was suffocating. The prosecution wasted no time. They called forensic psychologists, crime scene experts, and family members of Cherish. Photos were shown, some too graphic for even seasoned jurors. A timeline of Donald's prior crimes was read out loud. Gasps echoed in the courtroom when one detail emerged. He had attempted to lure another child just 3 days before Cherish. The mother had called police, but he was gone before officers arrived. That child had survived by seconds. Cherish hadn't. Then came Rain. She read her victim impact statement through tears. Her voice was fragile but steady. She spoke of sleepless nights, of guilt that gnawed at her, of moments when she woke up believing Cherish was still alive. She talked about her daughter's laugh, her love for animals, her excitement about her upcoming birthday. And she described the moment she realized Cherish was never coming back. "Part of me died that night," she whispered. Billy spoke next. His pain was quieter, colder. "I never got to say goodbye," he said. "I'll never hear her call me daddy again." He glared at Donald from the stand. "You didn't just murder my daughter. You murdered every future memory we were supposed to have. The defense brought out witnesses from Donald's past. Former teachers, neighbors, even a childhood friend. They tried to show he was once a boy like any other, quiet, smart, withdrawn. But with every plea for mercy came a reminder from the prosecution. This wasn't about a broken past. It was about the choice he made. When the jury returned after 2 days of deliberation, they looked exhausted. The courtroom fell into a hush. The foreperson stood. We, the jury, unanimously recommend the sentence of death. Rain let out a sob. Billy stared forward, unblinking. Judge Mallory Cooper made it official a week later. Donald James Smith, for the premeditated and brutal murder of Cherish Lily Periwinkle. This court sentences you to death. Donald Smith blinked twice. That was all. Outside, the community gathered. Candles were lit. Balloons released into the sky. A little girl's name was whispered in prayer, carried upward with every flame and every tear. Justice had been served, but peace remained far away. After the sentencing, the courtroom emptied, but the story continued behind the scenes. Appeals began almost immediately. Donald's defense team filed motions challenging the trial's fairness, questioning jury selection, and arguing that the emotional weight of Rain's testimony had unfairly influenced the verdict. These appeals stretched for years. Meanwhile, Rain tried to rebuild, but she couldn't escape the spotlight. Media requests flooded in, documentaries, interviews, podcasts. She declined most. Some painted her as negligent, others as a victim herself. Online, the debate turned cruel. Strangers speculated about her parenting. They dissected every choice she made in the hours leading up to Cherish's disappearance. Rain moved twice, changed jobs, even dyed her hair to avoid recognition. But the guilt clung to her like fog. Therapy helped some. So did her weekly supervised visits with Destiny and Naya. But nothing filled the absence Cherish left behind. Billy tried to cope differently. He turned inward, channeling his grief into action. He launched a foundation in Cherish's name, advocating for stronger sex offender laws and faster Amber Alerts. If they had issued that alert the minute I called, Rain would often say, maybe they could have stopped him. Billy pushed to make sure that no parent would have to wonder. A few years passed, and then another legal twist emerged. Donald's new attorneys filed a motion for retrial, claiming ineffective counsel during the original proceedings. They said his defense failed to strike a biased juror, didn't argue certain forensic details, and ignored mental health issues that could have spared him the death penalty. The court agreed to a hearing. Rain was devastated. The idea that she might have to sit through it all again, hear the details, see the photos, face him, was unbearable. She sat in the back row of the courtroom, her hands clenched, as Donald was wheeled in. Older, thinner, wearing the orange jumpsuit of a death row inmate. This time, there were no outbursts, no tears, just cold legal arguments. The judge listened, took notes, then recessed for a week to consider. When she returned, her voice was clear. The defense has not met the burden required for a retrial. The sentence stands. This court is adjourned. Rain exhaled for the first time in weeks. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Any comment? They asked. She shook her head, then looked into the camera. This isn't just about justice for Cherish. It's about protecting every other child from predators like him. Then she turned and walked away. In the years that followed the failed retrial, the case of Cherish Periwinkle remained etched in public memory. It wasn't just a headline anymore, it became a rallying point. A benchmark in conversations about child safety and predator tracking. Florida lawmakers, under immense pressure from both the public and advocacy groups, drafted what would become known as the Cherish Act. It was aimed at streamlining the Amber Alert system, mandating faster police response times in abduction cases, and establishing a central database that would track sex offender violations in real time. The legislation passed unanimously in the Florida House and Senate. Rain was there to witness the signing, holding a framed photo of Cherish. This won't bring her back, she told the cameras, but it might save another child. Meanwhile, Donald Smith sat on death row at Florida State Prison in Rayford. His appeals had dwindled. His days were marked by routine and silence. He didn't speak to other inmates. He refused all interviews. But in 2022, something unexpected happened. A handwritten letter arrived at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. It was from Donald. The letter didn't contain remorse. Instead, it rambled, a mix of legal jargon, conspiracy theories, and vague religious references. But one detail stood out. He claimed that he wasn't the only one involved. Detectives reopened portions of the investigation to verify the claim. They reviewed surveillance footage again, re-interviewed witnesses, and searched old call logs. Nothing pointed to an accomplice. Still, they couldn't ignore the possibility. Rain was informed. Her reaction was one of exhaustion. "He's lying," she said flatly. "He just wants attention." Despite that, the sheriff's office conducted a quiet re-examination over the course of 6 months. They found no credible evidence to support Donald's statement. He remained the sole person responsible. The file was officially closed again. But the damage was done. The media reignited. True crime blogs speculated endlessly. YouTube creators produced mini-documentaries with sensational titles. Some accused Rain of being involved. Others concocted theories that stretched far beyond reason. Once again, Rain was forced to relive her daughter's final hours in the court of public opinion. In 2023, 10 years after Cherish's death, the city of Jacksonville held a candlelight vigil in her memory. Hundreds gathered. A small plaque had been installed at the Dollar General parking lot, discreet but powerful. It read, "In memory of Cherish Lily Periwinkle. May her light guide us in protecting all children." Billy and Rain stood together that night. Their pain weathered by time but not lessened. Rain spoke softly to the crowd. "Cherish loved the stars. Every time I see them now, I know she's watching. Not in fear, not in pain, but in peace." The impact of Cherish Periwinkle's murder rippled far beyond Jacksonville. Across the nation, her story became a haunting reminder of how quickly trust can turn to tragedy. Parents held their children closer. Schools revisited safety policies. Local law enforcement in dozens of states began reevaluating how fast they issue Amber Alerts and how they monitor known offenders. In Washington, D.C., lawmakers cited Cherish's case while proposing federal reforms. A bipartisan bill titled the Child Protection Reinforcement Act aimed to strengthen tracking of high-risk predators across state lines. The act would require electronic monitoring for sex offenders deemed highly likely to reoffend. Regardless of parole status, it passed the House but stalled in the Senate, drawing both praise and protest. While legislation moved slowly, the internet moved fast. Social media campaigns lit up. Hashtags like #JusticeForCherish and #KeepKidsSafe trended. Online communities formed around child protection. Cherish became a symbol, her name etched into the digital age of activism. Petitions for harsher penalties on released predators garnered millions of signatures. Documentaries were produced. Podcasts dissected the case episode by episode, amplifying every detail. Rain, however, chose silence. After years of interviews, court appearances, and public scrutiny, she withdrew from the spotlight. Friends said she started painting. Her artwork, often depicting starry skies and shadowy trees, was quietly sold online under a pseudonym. She kept a photo of Cherish on her desk, taped beside a quote, "She believed she could. So she did." Billy, too, stepped back from public advocacy. He moved to Northern California, remarried, and started a small mechanic shop. In interviews, he remained candid about his grief. "Time doesn't heal, it hardens," he said. "You just learn to carry it differently." As for Donald Smith, he continued filing legal motions. None were successful. His final appeal in 2024 was denied without comment. A date for his execution had not been set, but the Florida Department of Corrections confirmed he remained under maximum security surveillance. In late 2024, a documentary film titled Cherish, The Light That Was Lost premiered at a small Florida film festival. It was directed by a local mother who had been pregnant with her daughter the night of Cherish's vigil. The film blended archival footage, court transcripts, interviews, and artistic reenactments. It didn't just tell a story of loss. It asked deeper questions about justice, prevention, and the price of systemic failure. The final scene showed the plaque at the Dollar General. As wind rustled through the leaves, a little girl in a white dress placed a drawing beneath it, a sketch of a bike, a star, and a girl smiling. 10 years after Cherish's death, Her legacy lived on in ways both expected and unforeseen. Jacksonville's police department held an annual memorial service each June, where officers lit candles for victims of child abductions. At the ceremony, her name was always the first spoken. A small foundation in her name offered art scholarships to young girls in Florida, a tribute to her love of drawing. Rain attended some of these events, often in silence, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. She never gave another major interview but was known to handwrite thank you notes to donors and supporters. Her letters were heartfelt and raw, sometimes smudged with tears, always signed, Cherish's mom. In schools across Duval County, the Cherish Safety Week became a recurring program. It included stranger danger drills, talks from child advocates, and sessions teaching kids how to identify safe adults. More than just a curriculum, it was a pledge. This would not happen again. Meanwhile, the legal community in Florida continued wrestling with the failures that let Donald Smith walk free. A panel of retired judges, prosecutors, and forensic psychologists released a report titled Cracks in the Wall. It laid out how civil commitment systems faltered, how information slipped through databases, and how bureaucratic gaps gave Smith just enough space to strike. The state government responded with new funding and directives, creating a task force that reviewed every pending release of a high-risk offender. Though the system was far from perfect, the sense of urgency was new. In early 2025, a journalist named Lydia Pierce published a nonfiction book titled The Vanishing Hour. It chronicled the last 3 hours of Cherish's life minute by minute. Based on police logs, surveillance footage, and Rain's brief recollections, it became a bestseller. The audiobook version was narrated by a mother whose own daughter had survived an abduction attempt, lending it painful authenticity. The story didn't fade from public memory. It deepened. Artists painted murals, poets wrote verses. A school in Orlando planted a tree and called it Cherish's Hope. One girl's tragedy had sparked an ongoing fight. Jacksonville, July 2025. A sweltering morning began with the clang of prison gates. Reporters crowded outside Florida State Prison, clutching microphones and camera lenses. Inside, Donald Smith sat expressionless in an orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled, flanked by guards. He had reached the end of all appeals. The death warrant had been signed. In a cold, concrete room, Smith's final hours unfolded with clinical precision. He declined a final meal, refused a priest, and spoke to no one. The media room filled with a quiet, anxious tension as family members of victims and law enforcement took their seats behind a thick pane of glass. At 6:01 a.m., a voice echoed from the intercom. "Warden, you may proceed." The needle entered his arm. One by one, the drugs were administered. Midazolam, vecuronium bromide, potassium chloride. His chest heaved once, then stopped. By 6:14 a.m., Donald Smith was pronounced dead. Rain Periwinkle, watching from another room, wept, not from pity, but from exhaustion. A journey that had begun in terror ended in silence. Beside her sat a framed photo of Cherish, age 8, smiling with a missing front tooth. Outside, reporters rushed to deliver the news. "Justice for Cherish," one headline read. "Predator executed," said another. But for those who had truly known her, no headline could capture the hollow space she left behind. Billy, Cherish's father, issued a quiet statement. "I miss my daughter every day. I always will. But today, there's one less monster in the world." The story of Cherish Lily Periwinkle became more than a tragedy. It became a warning, a reform, and a memorial. From Jacksonville to every small town that watched her face flash across the screen. Parents hugged their children tighter. Laws were revised, systems re-examined, communities changed. Because of one little girl who just wanted a new dress.